All right, so we are going to talk about the defensive backs on today's episode, and we're going to start off with the transfers and the recruits. And leading us off, transfers, is Duce Chestnut, a 6', 205-pound redshirt junior. He's got 2 years of eligibility left. He is a safety or a corner, depends how they want to use him for next season. He transferred back to Syracuse after a year at LSU where he didn't do a whole lot outside of the first game where he picked off Jordan Travis. If you recall, LSU was playing Florida State in that game. FSU won in a blowout, I believe. That was about it for Duce Chestnut in an LSU uniform, so he is back with Syracuse. He was a freshman All-American in 2021. In 2022, he was honorable All-ACC. So he was really good. He was really good on the Hill. Parlayed that success to LSU. Didn't quite translate. Now he is back with Syracuse. He is a possible bounce-back candidate for this team next season. And he could be moving to safety. Who knows? They do have a lot of safeties and corners right now that they can kind of move in interchangeable parts. I would see him more as a free safety. But regardless, he has cornerback skills. So if they were to move him to safety, I think he would be really solid back there. Moving on, let's go to another transfer. This one is actually new, unlike Duce Chestnut, who is just returning to the team after a season at LSU. That is Devin Grant. I know there's a lot of excitement about him. He is 6'4", 190 pounds. He is a junior with 2 years of eligibility left. He is a safety/corner. He was first team All-MAC selection at Buffalo this past season, and he led his conference with 5 interceptions. Now, what I will say in terms of mid-major, outside of Power 5 schools in football, it's a little bit different than basketball. In basketball, it's more transferable for these guys. No pun intended there, but it's just you do well at the mid-major level, you go to the Power 5, you might not be as good in basketball, but still you can translate that to success. Sometimes you can get even better, like a Dalton Connect. He blossomed at Tennessee this past season, right? Football, a little bit different. It's going from the MAC to the ACC. It's tough, but he was a first-team All-MAC selection at Buffalo, led the conference with 5 interceptions that I mentioned. He did play mostly safety there, but in the spring game, he did line up as an outside corner. So he does have the size. The question is, does he really have the speed to be an outside corner? During that spring game, he was the corner that was burnt by Zeed Haynes on the near sideline. I get it that Zeed Haynes is fast, but at the same time, you're in the ACC, you're going to go up against some fast wide receivers, especially when they play the tougher competition. So Devin Grant, that's the main question with him, but nevertheless, he is a big body and can be very useful in the red zone for this team next season at guarding big body wide receivers. Next up, we got Clarence Lewis. He is 5'11", 185-pound grad student with 1 year of eligibility left. He is a nickel corner coming from Notre Dame. He played all 50 games with the Irish in his 4 seasons. He has 3 career interceptions with them. I did do a mini podcast on him, so you can check that out after this video. I'll leave a link in the description below to Clarence Lewis. But basically, this is someone who teammates have really praised his work ethic, coaches included. Pro Football Focus, though, says that his weakness is tackling. Given that he's 5'11", 185, that doesn't really surprise me. A little bit on the smaller scale there. Best in the nickel. That's the thing with Clarence Lewis. He did commit right around the time of the spring game. I can't really remember exactly whether it was right before or right after it. But regardless, he did not dress for the spring game, so it was hard to get a read as to how Syracuse will use him next season. My guess is that he's going to fight to be the nickel. So in case you're not aware of what a nickel defense is, it's when a team plays 5 defensive backs on the field. The 5th defensive back is what's called the nickel. And that is where Clarence Lewis did pretty well at Notre Dame while he was there for 4 seasons. Moving on, we got Marcus Washington. If you recall, Mike McAllister, when he was last on the podcast, broke the news while literally being on it during the recording. Marcus Washington, a 6'1" sophomore with 3 years of eligibility left. He is a corner. Former 4-star recruit at Georgia. Fran Brown was his recruiter there. Pretty interesting. And obviously, Fran Brown's now the head coach of Syracuse football, in case you weren't aware. He played one game with Georgia in 2022 before then transferring to Louisville, and he did not play last season. Again, this was someone who came actually after the spring game, so it was tough to get a read as to how Syracuse is going to use him next season. My best sense is that he seems like someone who could be a reclamation project. Not a bounce-back candidate, but someone who was a former 4-star recruit at Georgia. He has talent. The question is, can this coaching staff coach him up? They have plenty of years of eligibility to do it for him to one day be a productive corner at the college level, let alone the pro level. So that is it for the transfers. There were 4 of them. Yeah, 4 of them this past season for Syracuse. Duce Chestnut coming back from LSU, Devin Grant from Buffalo, Clarence Lewis from Notre Dame, and Marcus Washington from Georgia and Louisville. So those are the 4 transfers. But Syracuse does have 3 high school recruits coming in on the defensive backs. Once again, we are going over defensive backs here on today's podcast. Let's start off with one of the top recruits for Syracuse football this past offseason. In 2024, I should say, because they've gotten a number of good recruits in 2025 and 2026. But for 2024, Marcellus Barnes, 5'11", 165-pound corner from Chattanooga, Tennessee. He is a 24/7 Sports composite 4-star player, top 30 overall cornerback in the country. Originally was committed to Virginia Tech, but then he decommitted and then chose Syracuse over schools like Georgia and Ole Miss. Imagine Syracuse beating out a 4-star player for Georgia and Ole Miss. I think a common misnomer with the recruiting is that Syracuse has never been able to beat out those top schools for players. They have beaten them out for players. They have beaten out Georgia or an Ole Miss for a player. The difference is that it's usually not for a super quality high school player. Because Georgia and Ole Miss are schools that are getting the best of the best athletes in high school. Marcellus Barnes, composite 4-star recruit, one of the top 30 cornerbacks in the country, that would qualify to me as one of the better athletes in high school. And he chose Syracuse over Georgia and Ole Miss. That is the difference with Fran Brown compared to years prior in recruiting. It's not that they haven't been able to beat out those schools for recruits. It's the quality players that they've been missing out on to those schools. So they got Marcellus Barnes. I would not be surprised if he saw the field for Syracuse, even though he is a true freshman next season. I wouldn't. I would not be surprised at all. He does have a lot of talent. In the spring game, he was primarily used as a backup. He was on the second team, but still, I could see him maybe creeping up. But here's the thing. They don't have to. They don't have to play him. I'll talk about it also with the holdovers from last year. But Syracuse can run a DB lineup of Justin Barron, Alijah Clark, Duce Chestnut, Jayden Bellamy is also back, and Devin Grant. So if you run those 5, Marcellus Barnes can be a depth piece for you. Probably appear in every game that Syracuse plays in next season. Maybe doesn't get a start, but sees a few snaps at defensive back. Would not be surprised if he saw the field. The next 2 recruits are probably going to be red shirts for the team next season. Raheem Long Jr., 6 foot, 170-pound corner from Camden, New Jersey. He is a 3-star. And Ibn McDaniels, 6'3", 195-pound corner from Elizabeth, New Jersey. Love the size with him, but also probably a red shirt. Nothing, that's not bad. It's not bad as a true freshman to redshirt. There are plenty of players who have redshirted in their first season in college football and went on to have successful college and pro careers. I don't have an example off the top of my head, but I promise you it's real. It's happened before plenty of times. I wouldn't worry if they have to redshirt. Not a big deal. So of the 3 recruits, I would say Marcellus Barnes is the one who is definitely most likely to get on the field for Syracuse football next season. So that about wraps up the newcomers for Syracuse football. Once again, they had 4 transfers: Duce, Chestnut, Devin Grant, Clarence Lewis, and Marcus Washington. And then they had 3 high school recruits: Marcellus Barnes, Brahim Long Jr., and Ibn McDaniels. So that's it for the transfers and recruits. Now coming up, we're going to talk about who's coming back in the defensive backs for Syracuse football next season.